Hello there, everybody. Here we are with the bonus part of issue 36. Go and get this thing opened up. So before we get started, let's go ahead and bounce over, check out the details and the data for this issue, and then we'll come back and go through this. Okay, so here we are with the data and the details for issue 36. We have one video for this issue. We again worked on the framework and did some plating. Total build time was 48 minutes and 41 seconds. We took two video captures to do the entire thing. Our total record time was 33 minutes and 41 seconds, and our final video time was only 16 minutes and 10 seconds, so that's efficient. We did added 9 screws, and we painted it primer black. So if we look at our total time, we had our first video part was 29 minutes and 58 seconds, which of course I shortened by fast forwarding 8 times is what I did there for the taping part of that, masking part. And the final section was 3 minutes and 43 seconds. And we did 15 minutes of work off camera. And then finally, if we look here, we're up to a total of 53 videos on the build video, 158 captures, 26 hours and 49 minutes of video time, 85 hours and 32 minutes of build time, and our average video length is 30 minutes and 22 seconds. And we're up to 230 screws. So there we are. Okay, let's go ahead and go back and go through the magazine for this issue. All right, so hopefully you are still enjoying that. I say that every time. I've not heard otherwise, so I don't know why I keep saying it. But regardless, let's go ahead and get into this. So, considered a predecessor of the famous T-65 X-Wing, the ARC-170 was a heavy starfighter built for the Republic during the Clone Wars. It was perfectly suited for long-range missions, but it was also a capable vessel that could even take on a capital ship as large as bombers. Okay, so here we go. So essentially, what this talks about is that this was actually developed before the Clone Wars. So one of the new designs that entered the battlefield was during the Clone Wars was the ARC-170 Aggressive Reconnaissance Starfighter. Although it was developed shortly before the outbreak of the conflict, this key warship made a fairly late entrance into the Clone Wars due to a dispute between its builders, the long-standing partner Incom Corporation and Sublights Products Corporation, or SubPro. They had dissolved their joint venture after the perceived failure of the Z-95 Headhunter, but still had to complete a couple of contracts, including the one for the ARC-170. Although the ARC-170 was released under the banner of both companies, it was a SubPro design in name only. All right, so one of the things about this is uh, it looked like a burly Z95, so that was kind of significant. But one of the things about this was that it was chocked full of all kind of communications, jamming devices, active scanners, long wave antenna. Um, it had three count them, 3 crew members, and there was also a droid astromech. So you can see here, there's 1, 2, and there's one that's rear facing, and then you have the droid up top. So that was kind of one of its downfalls, but the wings that popped up, they worked as they unfolded to expose the heat sinks and radiators built into each of the larger wings. So that was an asset for them because they could dissipate the heat much better during combat. It was a pardon me. It was the most heavily armed starfighter of the Clone Wars, and for maximum control of its weapon system and 3 people, like I said, it had. Well, let's go through some of the points for it here. Sorry. So it's 14.5 5 meters long, 22.6 meters wingspan, and it was 4.7 meters high. It cost 155,000 credits. Its maximum acceleration was 2600 G. Maximum airspeed was 1,000 kilometers per hour. Had a Class 1.5 light hyperdrive, and with a 5,000 light year range. It carried 5 days worth of consumables. Had 2 medium laser cannons, 2 aft laser cannons, and 6 proton torpedoes. So one of the things about carrying all the weaponry and the crew and all that kind of stuff, they had limited speed, poor maneuverability, and slow acceleration, which generally doesn't bode well for it. However, this was compensated by robust armor, decent shielding, and the aft cannons with a 5-day supply of consumable air, and as we mentioned. So it was designed as a long-range scout fighter, ready to undertake the loneliest, most independent missions far away from any Republic presence into Confederate territory. The sensors were able to pick up any activity, and if the ship encountered enemy fighters, it carried the firepower to deal with them. So, of course, they weren't quite as nimble as some of the other uh, ships, so they didn't bode well for some of the dogfighting and that kind of stuff. So, um, yeah. Uh, let's just make sure we don't have anything here. Yeah, so whenever they were got into a gunfight, the rear pointing cannons, they served them quite well. So, I thought this was rather interesting. Clone Flight Squad 7. The Open Circle fleet, led by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, carried thousands of ARC-170s, although enlisted non-clone pilots manned some of the starfighters, and the fleet's foremost ARC-170 V-Wing squadron, Clone Flight Squad 7, consisted only of Jango Fett clones. Led by veteran pilot Commander Oddball Davijon, Squad 7 took part in the Battle of Coruscant, where General Kenobi called for the assistance to protect himself and Skywalker in their run toward General Grievous's flagship, the Invisible Hand. Uh, although Squad 7 suffered many casualties on their flight from the Venator-class destroyer Roti Mundi, their cover for Kenobi and Skywalker allowed the two Jedi to board Grievous's ship, where they managed to rescue Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. So yeah, it served a lot of good quality purposes, and it somewhat reminds you of a Y-wing, being very durable and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's more of supposed to be more of a fighter. So it's kind of interesting. Even though the Y-wing also made its debut during the Clone Wars, it's kind of interesting that they had two that were extremely durable ships. So looking at the behind the scenes here, known simply as a clone fighter in the script for the Revenge of the Sith, the ARC-170 can trace its name to the file name used to the piece of artwork that established its look, Art-170. Early concepts from August 2002 formed the basis for the Starfighter, which was later completed by Ryan Church. Meant to be a progenitor of the X-Wing, the ARC-170 shares similar design features such as the flanking cylindrical engines from which extended spitting S-foil wings, tipped with laser cannons. The clone pilots seen on board were computer generated, with actor Tamura Morrison's face adorned with computer generated helmet and costuming. After having appeared in the Clone Wars miniseries, the ARC-170 made its debut in season 2 of the Clone Wars in the episode The Xylo Beast. A Xylo Beast. So there you go. There's a little bit about the ARC-170s. So let's talk about the deep core. So basically, the main part of the deep core is it's a very dense area of space, because it's the core of the galaxy, right? So that's important to note one of the other important things to note is at the center is a black hole, which we'll kind of cover over. But because it was so dense, it was very hard to travel through. So there wasn't ready-made hyperspace lanes. The hyperspace lanes were constantly moving, and that was because of the black hole and how it would turn, and it was moving all those stars. So the hyperspace lanes were constantly moving, and that required a lot of effort to get in there. So, keen to keep secrets of the deep core hidden, Emperor Palpatine ordered that only vessels authorized by the Bureau of Ships and Services, the BOSS, and the Imperial Security Bureau, the ISB, could enter the region. This decision served two purposes. In the interest of protecting the public, BOSS could claim that it was keeping travelers safe from the violent anomalies hidden within the deep core. Meanwhile, the ISB did what it had always done and used every means to protect the Emperor's many secrets. So, yeah, that's one of the things about it is, like I said, it's constantly changing. So that became one of the problems with it. Another thing that was many of the worlds within the deep core were deprived of true light as star pack the skies so densely that total blackness is rare. Due to the ever-shifting nature of these tightly packed stars, navigational routes are desperately dangerous to traverse. The slightest shift in a coordinate could send a starship crashing into a sun or hyperspace anomaly, and so a process of almost constant remapping was uh, initiated. Despite this, travel within the deep core remained a risky proposition, and few dared to attempt it. Only the foolhardiest smugglers would try to attempt its impossible pass, and the majority of those who tried failed miserably. Even vessels well equipped to travel the few safe routes risked annihilation. So here it talks about a black hole. It's sitting in the very center of the deep core. It forces everything within the deep core to kind of rotate and move, and so that causes a lot of problems. So it gives a little bit about connections within the core. Kind of not terribly interesting. Um, Rise of the Empire. As a settled galaxy grew and grew, developing into regions and sectors thousands of light years apart, the deep core remained much the same. Exploration was discouraged, and much of the deep core stayed untouched. But in the waning days of the Republic, Chancellor Palpatine dispatched thousands of probe droids into the deep core. As the Republic crumbled after the machinations of the Sith and the fall of the Jedi, Palpatine decided to use the maelstrom of the deep core to his advantage. The routes his probe droids had discovered led to a number of habitable worlds, and so Palpatine took Empress Teta and used it as a staging post to colonize and populate a fresh region. Wealthy opportunists took to the chance to invest in the deep core and curry favor with Palpatine in developing a new region loyal to the Empire. So yeah, that is kind of significant. And this here talks about how uh, basically how the Empire would control ships that would go in there. So basically, you could uh, only make like 2 light year jumps at a time or something like that. So uh, limited jumps to 2 systems at a time. Once complete, each vessel was required to check in with Imperial vessels in the area and download the ever-changing astrogation updates required for safe passage. For captains eager to avoid such attention, interdictors waited at key points, and lanes were laced with gravitic mines, combining into hyperspace security net. In short, if the Empire didn't want you in the deep core, it was unlikely you would survive. So yeah, that's kind of significant. As far as behind the scenes, few mainstream Star Wars characters hail from the mysterious deep core, but the planet Vulpter was first introduced in the reference book Inside the World of Star Wars Episode 1 in 2000, as the homeworld of podracer Dud Bolt, who featured who had featured in the previous year's Phantom Menace. The Vulpterines appearance was first realized in mid-1996 in concept illustrations by artist Terrell Whitlatch. In the film, Bolt appeared during the pod race sequence where he was introduced by name. He and Mars Guru were the only two pod racers portrayed by puppets instead of computer generated graphics or actors, although computer generation was used for distant shots. In 2002, in the 2002 film Star Wars Attack of the Clones, the pilot from the Deep Core briefly appeared again as Bolt is seen racing his pod racer and on a hollow screen. So he got to be in two of them, and so he's the only character from the Deep Core that we know of. Now, one of the things that if those that have watched Mandalorian season 2, they mentioned Tython, and you can see that here. As far as I know, Tython's not actually in the Deep Core, but I could be wrong. Um, but that's kind of interesting. Concussion missiles. This basically just talks about concussion missiles and how deadly they can be. There's two main parts. There are types. There's what's known as the Dimec concussion missile, and then there's the ARC-170 ST2 concussion missile. So, pardon me. So basically, concussion missiles vary in design from long tubular weapons fitted with short winglets to egg-shaped units with no wings at all, but each type operates on similar principles. These weapons consist of powerful warhead housed in armor-piercing casings that contains a simple propulsion system and guidance device to direct the missile to target. So, traveling at sublight speeds, they normally have an optimum range of 250 to 300 meters and a maximum usable range of between 700 and 750 meters. On impact, the small energy pack in the warhead triggers a concussion blast capable of damaging a substantial area as well as disrupting instruments and other equipment. So one of the things also is um, you could airburst them as well on planets, and so that's kind of significant. Um, the concussion missiles are not cheap, costing anywhere from 750 to 2,500 credits, depending on the make of the model and payload size, as well as the legal status of both the seller and the buyer. So depends on where you're getting them. Each missile is stored in a housing designed to protect it during transport, storage, and loading, and which also acts as a launch tube. Weapons manufacturers generally produce both the launchers and the missiles and sell them as units. So you'd buy them as a unit. So that's kind of interesting. Um, so this is where it's talking about air bursting. Such the strength of a blast that can even cause the surface planets to shudder, and in some cases, concussion missiles have been known to trigger minor earthquakes. So there you go, air bursting. Um, so it talks about how here the Millennium Falcon had uh, had some concussion missiles, and Han was very well known. Solo commonly loaded up Dolbus Dimec projectiles alongside the rocket-like Arachid type, so that's kind of important. And they used the concussion missiles when they took down the second Death Star. So. And our behind the scenes for this is the all in one take. Designer Nilo Rodis Jamero had just returned from Hong Kong when he designed the infrastructure of the second Death Star for the scene in Return of the Jedi, where the Millennium Falcon lets loose a volley of concussion missiles inside the battle station. And this had a big impact on his vision. I was really impressed at how crowded that place, Hong Kong, was. Everything is squeezed in, and the designer in the annotated screenplays and the design said the designer in annotated screenplays. And so my first take on the running around inside the Death Star was unbelievably crowded. If you look at my storyboard on the sequence, there are even a lot of references in Chinese that say subway. The sequence had to be achieved using models and industrial light and magic visual effects. Artist Dennis Murin described the design of the tunnel and the Death Star superstructure through which the Falcon flies to get to the main reactor. The big area here in the end was really nice model, Murin said of the main reactor. I remember it being about 10 meters, or excuse me, 10 feet across or so, and there's a big thing in the middle, probably about 4 or 5 feet across. The big dome thing that hanging from the ceiling that crumbles. The Falcon being chased by a fireball was pretty exciting, Mirren said, because it was a difficult effect to achieve. Fire, of course, just wants to overtake you, so they were pulling the camera back at the same time as the fireball is actually coming toward the camera to get these elements. The fire was actually in the model. Probably the model in those cases would only work for one take, I think. There you go. So you get to learn about some concussion missiles. And again, here's what we took care of in this episode. We just did some framework, and then we painted up some of our hull plating, the inside part. And so next time we're gonna get some more framework. We're gonna get parts of the uh, outside hull plating for around the loading ramp and that kind of stuff, and then general regular hardware. So look forward to that, and that will be this upcoming Friday. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody, for watching, and may the force be with you always.